A man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. Jean-Paul Sartre. You became what she wanted. Slowly, without even knowing it. You started as a man, untamed, unknowable, fiercely alive, and you ended up a version of yourself that fit her comfort. You looked into her eyes and subtly, profoundly abandoned your own. I've seen this countless times in friends, and yes, in myself. That gradual softening, that quiet compromise of authenticity, all to fit into someone else's idea of what you should be. You start off with a clear sense of self, a defined direction. Then bit by bit, you yield. A small piece of your independence here, a slight adjustment to your values there. You bend until you break, and when you finally look in the mirror, a stranger looks back. It's like you started as the author of your own epic and somehow ended up a side character in someone else's mundane novel. Jean-Paul Sartre, in a Paris lit by war and rebellion, wrote a sentence that should be etched into the soul of every man at birth. Hell is other people. Not because people are inherently evil, but because in their gaze, in their expectations, in their desire for you to be something specific, we often lose ourselves. That for Sartre is not love. That is bad faith. It's the moment you stop being the author of your existence and become a mere character in someone else's script. It doesn't matter if you're 20 and chasing her texts or 50 and wondering why your marriage feels like a quiet extinction. The shape of the prison is the same. It's the silent, tragic extinction of self that happens when you live for her instead of being for yourself. That for Sartre is a bad faith. It's the ultimate enemy of authentic existence. It's that insidious moment when you stop being the author of your own existence and instead become a mere character in someone else's novel. And it doesn't matter if you're 20 and tirelessly chasing her texts or 50 and wondering why your marriage feels like a quiet extinction. The shape of the prison is precisely the same. You became for her instead of being for yourself. Now hear this and let it resonate. The man who lives for her will ultimately die by her indifference. This isn't bitterness. This isn't anger. This is metaphysics. You see, Sartre understood that consciousness itself is a void, a nothingness. It has no fixed essence until it chooses, until it acts. It's a fundamental openness, a freedom. The man who forgets this, the man who thinks a woman will complete him, define him, redeem him, he hands over the steering wheel of his own soul. And she feels it. Whether she is 19 and still largely ruled by instinct or 45 and emotionally intelligent, she knows when you have placed her on the throne of your identity. She knows when your need for her has become louder, more desperate than your fundamental need to remain true to yourself. And that, my friend, is when she pulls away. Not because she is cruel, not because she doesn't care, but because desire cannot survive in captivity. It needs space. It needs risk. It needs freedom. Yours. The young man often doesn't know this yet. He still thinks his love is a currency that buys loyalty, attention, affection. He has not yet felt the soul-crushing humiliation of offering everything, of literally pouring out his essence, and watching her eyes wander, her interest fade. But he will. And the older man. He knows this truth all too well. He sits in silence beside a woman who once craved his presence, before he turned himself into a predictable echo, before he stopped challenging her reality, before he stopped being other, a distinct self-contained being, and became his idea of safe. She doesn't want safe. She wants sovereign. I experienced this bad faith in a profound way years ago. I remember desperately wanting to avoid conflict to keep the peace at all costs. There were countless times my gut screamed no, but my lips uttered yes to avoid upsetting someone I deeply cared about. I softened truths, diluted my opinions, and constantly filtered my authentic self, all in the misguided belief that this would secure affection and harmony. It felt like I was constantly contorting myself, becoming a reflection of what I thought the other person desired. The internal conflict was agonizing. That slow, painful realization that I was betraying my own essence, my own autonomy to maintain an external image. It was a profound self-betrayal, a quiet erosion of my true being, all in the desperate hope of securing external approval. The energy drained from me because I was living a lie, and that heavy feeling, that sense of being unmoored, was the direct result of that bad faith. And here's Sartre's shocking truth. The human heart longs for what it cannot possess, and the man who does not need her, the man who can walk into her life and just as easily walk out, is the one who makes her confront her own abyss. That confrontation awakens her not always gently but deeply. You've seen it. The man who says less, who gives less, who holds his shape when she storms. He doesn't bend, he doesn't beg, and somehow he is the one she cannot forget. Not because he played a game, but because he didn't break the rules of being. You want to be loved? That's human. But the moment you need to be loved to be someone, you vanish. This isn't a trick. This isn't a technique. This is existential integrity. It's the man who exists, first defines himself, first chooses his values first, and lets love orbit him if it dares. And if it doesn't, he is still whole. That is the man women fall for. The rare man, the Sartrean man, the one who remembers that the price of freedom is solitude, and he pays it gladly. You've been told to open up, to be vulnerable, to express your needs, to tell her how much she means to you. And yet the more you opened, the more she closed. The more you shared, the more she withdrew. You thought your transparency would earn trust, but instead it diluted the mystery. You became readable, tame, harmless. Why? Because Sartre was right again. The human being is a project, not a product. You are not a fixed thing to be admired. You are an unfolding, a becoming. And when you reduce yourself to your emotions, your needs, your wounds, you confuse confession with presence. You turn your soul into a plea. You offer your depths before she's earned the map, and she cannot help but recoil. Not because she's heartless, but because the masculine in its highest form is not a boy begging to be understood. It is a force that exists with or without witness. I've had to learn this lesson about vulnerability the hard way. There was a time when I thought opening up meant dumping every insecurity, every past wound, every fleeting emotion onto the other person as a testament to my trust. I believed this raw transparency would foster deeper connection. But I noticed a pattern. The more I tried to be vulnerable in this way, the more the other person seemed to subtly withdraw. They didn't explicitly say it, but their desire seemed to diminish. I was so busy trying to be understood that I became readable, a book whose ending was too easily guessed. I learned that true vulnerability isn't about oversharing. It's about sharing your strength, your truth, and your authentic self, but only when it's earned. It's about being secure enough in your own being that you don't need their understanding as a prerequisite for your existence. That's the discernment between true vulnerability and mere neediness. A crucial insight I had to gain to stop pushing away the very attraction I craved. This is Sartre's shocking truth. The human heart longs for what it cannot possess. And the man who does not need her, the man who can walk into her life and just as easily walk out, is the one who makes her confront her own abyss. That confrontation awakens her not always gently but deeply. You've seen it. The man who says less, who gives less, who holds his shape when she storms. He doesn't bend. He doesn't beg. And somehow he is the one she cannot forget. Not because he played a game, but because he didn't break the rules of being. You want to be loved. That's human. But the moment you need to be loved, to be someone, you vanish. This isn't a trick. This isn't a technique. This is existential integrity. It's the man who exists, first defines himself, First chooses his values first and lets love orbit him if it dares. And if it doesn't, he is still whole. That is the man women fall for. The rare man. The Sartrean man. The one who remembers that the price of freedom is solitude, and he pays it gladly. You've been told to open up, to be vulnerable, to express your needs, to tell her how much she means to you. And yet the more you opened, the more she closed. The more you shared, the more she withdrew. You thought your transparency would earn trust, but instead it diluted the mystery. You became readable, tame, harmless. Why? Because Sartre was right again. The human being is a project, not a product. You are not a fixed thing to be admired. You are an unfolding, a becoming. And when you reduce yourself to your emotions, your needs, your wounds, you confuse confession with presence. You turn your soul into a plea. You offer your depths before she's earned the map, and she cannot help but recoil, not because she's heartless, but because the masculine in its highest form is not a boy begging to be understood. It is a force that exists with or without witness. I've had to learn this lesson about vulnerability the hard way. There was a time when I thought opening up meant dumping every insecurity, every past wound, every fleeting emotion onto the other person as a testament to my trust. I believed this raw transparency would foster deeper connection. But I noticed a pattern. The more I tried to be vulnerable in this way, the more the other person seemed to subtly withdraw. They didn't explicitly say it, but their desire seemed to diminish. I was so busy trying to be understood that I became readable, a book whose ending was too easily guessed. I learned that true vulnerability isn't about oversharing. It's about sharing your strength, your truth, and your authentic self, but only when it's earned. It's about being secure enough in your own being that you don't need their understanding as a prerequisite for your existence. That's the discernment between true vulnerability and mere neediness, a crucial insight I had to gain to stop pushing away the very attraction I craved. There is a moment, subtle, invisible, when a man begins to disappear into her expectations. It's not loud. There's no warning bell, no blaring alarm to save you. Just a quiet, insidious moment where you say yes when your soul screamed no. Where you soften a truth just to keep her calm. Where you withhold a boundary because you don't want her to leave. And in that moment, that almost imperceptible surrender, you betray the very essence of your being. Sartre named it clearly, mauvaise foi, or bad faith. It's the moment a free man lies to himself to avoid the discomfort of his own freedom. You convince yourself it's love, that sacrifice is noble, that compromise is maturity. But you know, if you are truly honest with yourself, that it is not a conscious offering. It is a quiet extinction. A soft suicide. And you think she doesn't notice. She notices. She always notices. Even if she can't name it, she feels it when you disappear from yourself. When your presence begins to orbit hers. When your truth becomes negotiable. When you start adjusting to avoid friction, and she grieves, not for you, but for the man you used to be. The man who met her as a mystery. The man who made her feel uncertain, alive, feminine, unstable in the best way. Now, you are reliable, you are predictable, you are safe. And yet you sense it. The emptiness growing in her eyes. The touch that no longer lingers. The laughter that now feels like a performance. And still you don't understand. You say, "But I've done everything right." Exactly. You've done everything right, and in doing so, you've become wrong in the one way that truly matters. You've ceased to be yourself. You've become a ghost of your former power. She didn't fall in love with your obedience. She fell in love with your distance, with your lack of need, with the untamed core you carried into the room before you decided that love meant taming yourself. This is where the older man, if he is truly honest, finally admits something excruciatingly painful. He doesn't know who he is when she isn't looking. He spent so many years being the provider, the protector, the dependable partner, that he's forgotten the boy who used to stare at the stars with fire in his chest, the boy who didn't need permission to speak to leave to simply be. That boy was closer to the truth than the man who replaced him. I had a moment like this, a true gut punch. I was in a long-term relationship, and I was so focused on being the perfect partner. I'd agree to things I didn't truly want, suppress opinions I knew were right, just to avoid conflict. I was doing everything right, being agreeable, supportive, always there. But one evening she made a casual comment about how easygoing I was, how I never caused any trouble. And in that instant it hit me, like a cold slap. I had indeed become easygoing because I had silenced all the parts of me that might cause friction. I realized I was doing everything right to fit her mold, but in doing so I had fundamentally betrayed the adventurous, opinionated, sometimes stubborn man I truly was. The emotional toll was immense. It was a profound self-betrayal, and the gut punch of that realization that my goodness was actually a costume was the start of a very painful but necessary journey back to myself. Now here's the paradox. Freedom is terrifying. That's why most men run from it. They escape into women, into work, into wine, into war, anything, to avoid the raw, unbearable truth of their own authorship. They seek external anchors, external validation, because the sheer weight of being the sole source of their own meaning is too much to bear. But the irresistible man, he is the one who chooses to carry that weight. He is the one who chooses to be the source to create meaning rather than constantly borrowing it. And in that radical act of being, he becomes something unshakable. He does not collapse. He can be touched, yes, by emotions, by life, by love, but he cannot be reshaped by it. He can be moved, but not removed from his center. He can offer love, but only from an overflow, never from emptiness. Sartre implied a sacred secret that often goes unsaid when a man is truly willing to be alone. He becomes irresistible, because aloneness is the birthplace of authenticity. I'm not talking about loneliness or exile or isolation born of bitterness. I'm talking about chosen solitude, the kind that hammers you into something unique, something no one else could forge, the kind that burns the noise out of you until your silence is its own kind of music, the kind that makes you enough in your own eyes without needing external mirrors. When that man speaks, he does not speak to impress. When he gives, he does not give to bind. When he stays freely. And when he leaves, he does not look back. And that man, that profound presence, it alters the very room he walks into. Not because of some trick, not because of status, but because he moves with the weight of someone who belongs only to himself. She cannot help but feel it. Not every woman will be ready for this man. Most are used to men who fold, who can be easily calibrated to emotional acrobatics and strategic compliance. They won't understand what it means to be near a man who simply refuses to be less than real. But some women, the right women, they will recognize you, not with their mind, but with their nervous system. They will feel safe not because you coddle them, but because they finally sense they are in the presence of someone who won't vanish into their expectations. And that, my friend, is rare. I embarked on a period of chosen solitude after that gut punch moment I mentioned earlier. It was daunting. My default programming screamed at me to find another distraction, another connection, but I forced myself into that silence. I spent months actively engaging with myself, writing, reflecting, building. The challenges were immense. The sheer discomfort of sitting with my own unresolved anxieties, the temptation to reach out to old contacts for validation. But each day I chose my own company, chose my own internal work. I felt a subtle but profound shift. The internal noise started to quiet. My own thoughts became clearer, my self-worth less dependent on external mirrors. This period of deliberate aloneness didn't make me lonely. It forged a core authenticity. And when I re-engaged with the world, the interactions were different. I wasn't seeking. I was simply being. And I noticed that new quality in my presence, that quiet self-possession, altered how others, particularly women, responded to me. It felt like I was finally walking with the weight of someone who belonged to himself. This is not cause for despair. This is the doorway. Because unlike the myths you've been fed, manhood does not shrink with age. It sharpens. It clarifies. It burns cleaner. If, and only if you stop lying to yourself. And the lie is simple that her love is the prize. It is not. The prize is the man who remains whole in the presence of love, who does not fracture into versions, who does not trade identity for intimacy, who can love her fully without letting her define him. Because once she senses you are no longer defined by her, she can finally relax into being with you. And yes, this defies everything you've been told. You were taught to serve, to please, to pursue. But Sartre saw through it all. He saw that to live authentically, you must remain a source of your own meaning, that you are condemned to be free. Not cursed, but required to choose yourself every single day, no matter who walks in or out of your life. And if she walks out, let her. If you are truly the rare man, the one who does not collapse into her absence, then you were never abandoned. You simply return to yourself, and she may come back or she may not, but you will remain, and that is the only way forward. You have never been more attractive than in the moment you no longer needed to be. That is the paradox, and yet almost no man believes it, because belief requires experience, and most men never give themselves the chance. They don't endure the silence long enough. They don't suffer the solitude to the end. They jump ship too early. They crawl back. They apologize for their truth. They break under the pressure of her disapproval. But the man who stays standing, the man who stays silent when her rage demands an explanation, the man who stays calm when she withdraws affection, expecting him to beg the man who stays rooted when she tests his resolve, not because he's playing games, but because he simply refuses to lie to himself, that man becomes unforgettable. Because he has become real. Sartre spoke of authentic existence. A life where a man accepts the weight of his freedom, the burden of his choice, and never pretends to be less than what he is. This is the essence of masculinity, not as performance, but as presence. And that presence, when it is not dependent on outcome, changes everything. She feels it. She may not even like it because it confronts her with her own freedom, with her own capacity to choose, with the unsettling awareness that this man will not collapse to make her feel more secure, that he will not abandon his direction just to follow her emotions, and that is when her desire returns, not because he chased, but because she remembers what it feels like to be with a man who doesn't orbit anything. There is no age limit to this. It is not too late. You could be 70 and still remember who you were before you gave yourself away. You could be in your 20s and choose now to never hand over your identity again. It begins not with loud declarations, but with small refusals. The refusal to send that last message begging for clarity. The refusal to break your silence just because the silence feels unbearable. The refusal to pretend you're okay with something that drains you just to keep the peace. You are not here to be liked. You are not here to be selected. You are here to become, to expand, to exist with such force that even in stillness, the world leans in. That is the legacy of the Sartrean man, the one who refuses to lie to himself just to be accepted by someone else. The one who knows that every time he sacrifices his authenticity for approval, he loses more than a moment. He loses a piece of his soul. And the soul, my friend, is not something you should gamble for love. Not ever. Because here's what they won't tell you: if she truly respects you, if she is truly ready for a man, she will not leave when you reclaim your freedom. She will meet you there. Not as a prize for your performance, but as a woman sovereign in her own being, choosing you not because you need her, but because you don't. And if she cannot, then she was never yours. She was your mirror, a reflection of your own abandonment. So step out of the mirror, shatter it if you must, and walk forward alone, not in loneliness but in power. Because only in that silence, that sacred solitude, will you meet the man you were always meant to be. And he is the one she cannot leave. I've come to understand this deeply in my own life. To arrive at this state of self-authorship isn't a destination. It's a continuous choice. The biggest shift in how I navigate relationships now is that I enter them not seeking completion, but offering wholeness. I no longer feel that agonizing need for external validation. My inner silence, once a terrifying void, now feels like home. It's the profound liberation of being the story rather than constantly trying to fit into someone else's. And in this truth, there's a calm power that no amount of chasing or performing could ever match. You have always been told to chase, but the truth is, the more you chase, the more you erase yourself. Let her come to you not as a reward, but as a test. Can you remain whole even in the presence of love? Can you hold your course even when she cries, pleads temps or storms? Can you stay in yourself not out of cruelty, but because you no longer wish to lie to yourself? If you can, you will find a freedom that no romance, no validation, no praise can match. You will have yourself, and in that self you will find more than power. You will find peace. You are not who you were at the beginning of this narration. Something has shifted. Maybe it's quiet. Maybe it's roaring. But you feel it. That deep inner silence no longer feels like loneliness. It feels like home. You are no longer reaching, no longer stretching yourself thin to be seen. No longer performing love like it's an audition. Now you are watching the world revolve slowly, rhythmically around a self you no longer compromise. And this is the secret Sartre understood, so well hidden between the pages of being and nothingness, and buried in the marrow of every man who's ever looked in the mirror and asked, "What am I if not who they want me to be?" You are nothing, and from that, nothing you are everything. You choose. No script, no savior, no role. Freedom is terrifying. That's why most men run from it. That's why they escape into women, into work, into wine, into war, anything, to avoid the raw, unbearable truth of their own authorship. But you have chosen otherwise. You have chosen to carry the weight, to be the source, to create meaning rather than constantly borrowing it. And this choice, this radical act of being, changes everything. It doesn't mean you don't love. It doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you do not collapse. You can be touched, but not reshaped. You can be moved, but not removed from your center. You can offer love, but only from an overflow, never from emptiness. And now she feels it. Whether she is 25 or 62, whether she is radiant or wounded, confident or confused, she feels something ancient rise in your presence, a gravitational pull. That does not beg. A sovereignty that does not shift. And maybe she stays, maybe she doesn't. But that's not the story anymore, because you no longer build your story around who stays. You are the story. She can read it or walk away, but you are not rewritten. This is your arrival, not at power, not at dominance, but at the holy stillness of a man who finally remembers what he is. He is not a mirror. He is not a mask. He is not a strategy, a plea, or a softened version of himself waiting for permission. He is. And now the world must decide what to do with that. Because you will not beg. You will not kneel. You will not trade your soul for a touch of text or a temporary high. You will walk forward without needing a witness. And that is the man they remember. That is the man she dreams about years later when her bed is warm but her spirit is cold. That is the man who no longer has to ask what went wrong. Because now he knows nothing went wrong. He simply hadn't arrived in himself yet. But now you have. And from this place, everything begins, not with a chase, not with a strategy, but with silence. Still, unbreakable, free. This was Sartre's shocking truth. Women fall for rare men who don't need them. If this woke something in you, if it stripped away a lie, if it showed you a version of yourself you haven't met in years, then like, share, and subscribe. Support the channel through the link in the description, because this isn't just a narration.